also go outside the lab and move from sort of science to anecdote. But for example, there's an ultramarathoner named Diane Van Daren. Has anybody heard of Diane Van Daren?
No.
Yeah.
Okay, so a few people have read about her. She has a really remarkable story. She was not a competitive runner at all until her late 30s. So she had fairly severe epilepsy, which was giving her progressively worse seizures. And at a certain point, she decided to have surgery to remove the part of the brain, about a golf ball size chunk of the brain, which is where the seizures were originating. So she had that surgery when she was 37, and it was successful. It stopped her seizures. But there's always some collateral damage when you have a surgery like that. And for her, she had some short-term memory problems, and also her ability to keep track of time and place and distance was compromised. She had never run races before, but after her surgery, she started running races. She started with a 50-miler, and that wasn't long enough, so she graduated to multi-day races, and eventually, in her 50s, she ended up setting a record for a traverse of a trail that crosses all the way across North Carolina. It took her 22 days, and she was running like 22 hours a day or something like that for more than 3 weeks. Just absolutely gruesomely grueling. But and it's not that she didn't suffer. She felt pain like everyone else, but she was willing to push herself. And what she said is, she could be out running for 2 weeks, and if someone said, "Hey, it's day one of a race tomorrow," she'd be like, "Hey, I'm ready to go. Let's go," because she didn't have that full awareness of how far she'd already come and how far she had to go. So your brain, in most of us, our brains sort of mercifully protect us, and they don't let us push ourselves all the way to the limit because we're always aware of how far we've come and how far we have to go. She's not as aware, she's not totally oblivious, but she's not as aware of that. She's able to live in the moment and run to her limits at any given moment, which for an ultra runner is a gift. But boy, it sounded like she really suffered on that 3-week North Carolina record-setting thing. So it's maybe a double-edged sword in terms of the ability to actually push yourself really close to your physical limits. So hopefully I've convinced you that the brain is involved in limits. So the natural question then is, can we change those limits? Can we use this information to push those limits back a little bit? And there are a few different ways we can do that. One of them is one of the ideas that I thought was really interesting is something called brain endurance training. It's an idea, a very preliminary idea, that again comes from this researcher Samuel Marcora. And Marcora did a really famous study in 2009 where he showed something that's kind of intuitively obvious, I think, to most of us, which is that mental fatigue impairs physical performance. So if you have a hard day at work and you clock out at 5 o'clock and go for a run at 5:05, you're not going to perform as well in that run, even if you've just been sitting at a desk all day. I certainly found this, if I'm writing a story and I'm on deadline late afternoon, if it's a stressful last-minute deadline, and then I try and go for a run right away, I'm just not as fresh, even though I'm physically fine. And Marcora showed this in his study using basically these computer-based tasks where you sit at a computer and shapes or numbers or arrows flash on the screen, and you tap a given button in response to what shape is on the screen. It's really easy. A 6-year-old could do it, but it takes focus. So it takes attention. And he found that after 90 minutes of this kind of computer task, then if people had to do a time trial, their perceived effort was higher right off the bat. Exercise felt harder, and so as a result, they reached exhaustion sooner. So mental fatigue impairs physical performance. Now, the next step he took is to say, well, maybe we can train that. So how would you train physical endurance? You go out and do things that are physically fatiguing day after day, and your body adapts. So his idea is, why don't you do things that are mentally fatiguing day after day after day and improve your brain endurance? So actually, I did an article for Runner's World on this a few years ago, and I decided to try it. So Marcora set up a 12-week brain endurance training program for me, which involved these computer tasks. So I would sit at the computer for up to 80 minutes at a time, tapping buttons in response to shapes and letters. And then I would try and go for a run. And it was a bizarre feeling. You could feel like my legs felt fine. It wasn't that I couldn't maintain the pace I wanted to maintain, it's that I didn't really want to. It was like my will to push myself was kind of sapped. Now, so I did that, and then I ran the Ottawa Marathon. Did it work? I have no idea. Like, I only ran one marathon, so I have no way of knowing. This was more of an experiential thing to find out how it felt, which was really boring and time-consuming and challenging. Mark Orr's done some interesting studies. They're pretty preliminary yet, and he's worked on ways of making it a little more practical. So instead of doing brain training and then physical training, he's doing like simultaneous brain and physical training. You're on an exercise bike and you're doing the brain training. And he's apparently working with an app developer to try and do something where you use headphones and beeps or something like that, so that you could do it while running with with headphones. So there's potential for it to become more practical. I would say it was so unpleasant that you'd have to really be into that last 1% of performance to want to go through the mental training. But it's an interesting concept, and I could see it becoming something. Maybe you do it when you're injured, or maybe if you're already training so much that your body can't handle more mileage, you can add some mental training. There's some potential. The other example I wanted to give was actually, for those of you who were here right at the start, we talked a little bit about the Breaking 2 marathon that Nike held last year. Eliud Kipchoge, again, ran 2 flat 25 after Nike spent millions of dollars trying to optimize every detail that could possibly go into this race. So, they held the race at a Formula One track in Italy. They had these fancy new shoes with a carbon fiber plate. They had 6 pacemakers in an arrowhead formation that had been optimized with wind tunnel testing and computational fluid dynamics, and yada, 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 yada. They were trying to, they had the water bottle, or the drink bottles were passed to the runners by a guy on a bicycle to make sure that they wouldn't have to slow down to pick up the bottle from a table, which Nike calculated cost 5 to 7 seconds per drink station. So, and I covered this for about 6 months, and the focus was really on all of this stuff, this tech that they were trying to, and the biomechanics and physiology that they were trying to bring to bear. And it's only sort of in hindsight that when I look back and see what I take away from that project, I actually see it. I have a different takeaway than focusing on the shoes. And what sticks with me is Eliud Kipchoge and what he brought to the table, as opposed to what the biomechanics and so on brought to the table. The first time I talked to Eliud Kipchoge was, I guess it was in November of 2016, with about 6 months before the project, and he had run he had just run a half marathon in just under 60 minutes. So I asked him, look, okay, in a few months you're going to try and run a marathon where you're trying to go twice as far at the same pace. How are you going to change your training to be able to double your distance at the same pace? And he said, I'm not going to change my training. The training will be the same, but my mind will be different. And I'm a skeptical guy, so I thought, well, that sounds like a terrible plan. How is that going to work? But over the next few months, it became clear that this wasn't just kind of sports cliches to him. This was something he really strongly believed. That people would ask him, "How do you think you could do this?" And he'd say, "You think it's impossible, and I think it's possible, and that's the difference between us." And I think, well, there's a few more differences, but I was very skeptical all along. But by the time we got to the race, there were 3 runners selected for this project, and it was clear, like Kipchoge, he believed he could do it. He believed, because to try and run a 2-hour marathon is this enormous leap of faith. You're going to go out in front of millions of people watching and go through the halfway in 1 hour, and then no one has done that. No one has tried to do that. It's like you're doomed. And you can tell that Kipchoge believed that he could do it. The other 2 guys hoped they could do it because it would make them rich for the rest of their lives. Kipchoge believed he could, and he has this. Anyone who speaks to him knows he has this aura, and everyone comments on it. This sort of calm, very quiet confidence, and he's kind of a Yoda of running. And it's like you don't even really, even what he's saying seems to make no sense. You're just like, oh man, that's so deep. That's amazing. So by the end, I was starting to be sort of a convert to the, and he was saying his favorite books are motivational self-help books, which is a genre that I find ridiculous. And his favorite book is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's like, I started to think, okay, well, maybe he is systematically and deliberately building his confidence and building his self-belief. And maybe there's something here. And then during the race, after about the halfway mark, he started smiling every kilometer or so. And people were like, why is he smiling? This can't be fun. And I was like, he's not smiling, he's grimacing. And I knew this because people often ask me after races what was so funny and why I was laughing. And I'm like, no, when I go like this, that's not a smile, that's like existential torment. So I figured it was the same for Kipchoge. But after the race, he's like, no, I was deliberately smiling. He said, I don't run with my legs, I run with my mind and my heart, and when I smile, I can make my legs, connect with my mind. And again, whatever. Then a few months later, of course, a guy in Northern Ireland named Bill Britt came out with a study where he asked runners to smile while they were running, and their running economy improved by 2%. They burned 2% less energy on average when they were told to smile. And so, and the idea here for Kipchoge is it's like those smiling faces in the subliminal images. He's changing the way his brain interprets the signals from the rest of his body. And at the end of the day, he ran 2 flat 25, and he is the Olympic champion. And so, at a certain point, my skeptical me had to sort of say, okay, hey, maybe there's something to learn here. And in the end, when I look back at that project, I say, I don't think science had a whole lot to teach Eliud Kipchoge about how to run faster, but I think the usefulness of some of this science is to kind of suggest to the rest of us how we can be a little bit more like Eliud Kipchoge, how we can find what he has found. And so in terms of practical takeaways, like if I had a time machine and could go back and tell my 20-year-old self something to do, the first thing I would say is try something like motivational self-talk, which is a pretty standard sports psychology intervention. We actually had someone working with our track team at McGill 20 years ago telling us this, who we all laughed at. We thought she was ridiculous. But I'd say, no, take it seriously, because now that lately, in the last few years, there have been a bunch of studies that actually try and test this and find that, so if you become aware of the internal monologue in your head, whether it's during a race or in other situations in life, often that internal monologue is pretty negative. Often it's like, this hurts so much, you can't do this, you're never going to make it. And if you can, the first step is to realize this, and then to think about it. And is this justified? Is this fair? If your internal monologue is, you idiot, you didn't do long runs, how are you going to get through this marathon? Well, maybe that's true internal. That's good faith self-talk. You can't talk yourself out of that. You need to do your long runs. But there are things that are not rational or not justified, that it just hurts so much you're never going to be able to do it. It's all over. If you can identify those and figure out things to replace them with, things that you can get behind and believe. You don't want to tell yourself, you can be the Olympic champion. That doesn't necessarily work. But yeah, you've trained for this. You're ready for this. You can push through this. And what the studies have found is that when you do that, yes, you enhance your performance, and you do it because a given level of effort feels easier. You've changed how your brain is interpreting those signals. There was a pretty neat study at Brock University by a guy named Stephen Chung, where he had cyclists doing tests in a heat chamber. And he gave half of them an intervention in motivational self-talk specific to dealing with heat. So instead of saying, oh God, I'm burning up, you say, okay, you're ready for this, you can do this. And sure enough, he found that the cyclists who got the self-talk were able to go a little faster. They actually improved from 8 minutes to 11 minutes in the time to exhaustion test. He also found that they were able to push their core temperatures about 0.3 degrees higher, which is a significant difference. So they were actually digging deeper into their physiological reserves. But their perceived effort, which he also measured throughout the test, was the same. So they were digging deeper, but the effort felt the same because of the change in their internal self-talk. So to me, that's a really, really sort of the number one takeaway message is be aware of what you're telling yourself, and it's not something you can't just wake up tomorrow and change your self-talk. It's something you have to work at. It's a process, but it seems to have really powerful effects. And I would definitely recommend it above electric brain stimulation.